Why do we sit here being silent, watching our leaders turn into tyrants? Have they forgotten which side they're fighting for? Checks and balances set aside and rule of laws, youth and ours, and Constitution openly ignored. Man, I'm not okay. Think we are being played. Is it time for right and left to join a greater cause? Man, I'm not okay. The rich claim to be victimized just to attack the marginalized. Is 1% really worth more than all the sick and poor? Always preaching about fellowship while planning their dictatorship. Now we've seen how all of this plays out before. Man, I'm not okay. Think we are being played. Time for you and I to join our country's call. Man, I'm not okay. Ever wonder all the mystery, why they whitewash our history, keep dividing is their plan? All in all, such a scam. Algorithm very sly, only used to spread the lies. Politicians know well, hate is simple to upsell. Man, I'm not okay. Think we are being played. Time for you and I to join our country's call.
We are not okay. America is not okay, and we all know that. Former Congressman Joe Walsh, this is The Social Contract with Joe Walsh. Let's figure out how to get okay together. Hey, former Congressman Joe Walsh with you this Tuesday on the road somewhere in southeast California. I'll tell you where later. Hope your week is off to a good start. I read a piece 2 days ago, and this doesn't happen all the time. I read an amazing piece in the Atlantic by a friend who wrote this, and the piece I've read it 3 or 4 times. I can't escape it. It's staying with me. And so I am so thrilled and honored to have the author of this piece in the Atlantic, Ken Harbaugh, with me now. There he is. Ken, how are you? Thanks for joining me. I want to tell everybody first about you and about the piece. Ken Harbaugh, a former U.S. Navy pilot, a writer, got his own Substack, the Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack that you need to follow and subscribe to. You see his writing all over the place. This piece, Ken, that I saw in the Atlantic, The Warrior Witches of Ukraine's Resistance, was just so powerful. And I know how deeply you're involved with, and you've been involved with what's going on in Ukraine. What compelled you to write this piece? Start there with me.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Joe. It's such an honor, as always, to talk to you. And I see once again you're on the road, man. You are doing the real work, and thank you for that. What compelled me? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you as well, my brother, are out there every day around the world doing real work. So continue.
Sure. This piece has been a couple years in the making, and I never set out to write it. It actually started. I'm glad you asked it this way because I haven't shared this part of the story yet. It started a couple of years ago when I was having a conversation with a special forces general inside Ukraine. I've always been fascinated by stories of leadership and what makes certain leaders rise to the top. And so we got into this sort of in-depth academic conversation. I asked him what it was like to send men and occasionally women on missions, which he was pretty sure they wouldn't come back from. I mean, we call them suicide missions today. And his answer, it floored me, and I've thought about it ever since. He said, "Well, the men I'm sending out there, they consider themselves dead already. They consider themselves expendable. It's actually not that hard," which was surprising enough. And then he said, "What really gets me are the kids." And I thought he meant the kids who are suffering under Russian occupation, the kids who are suffering under the Russian bombs and missiles. But as he explained it more, he was talking about the kids who are part of the resistance and
Ah,
the courage that they are demonstrating. And I mean, as a father, we're a couple of days past Father's Day. I've been thinking about this a lot. Um, I just thought, man, we are so lucky. I I take for granted every day that my
yeah.
kids do not have to be heroes. And that was actually a part of the piece that didn't make it into the final cut, but you might remember the conversation I was having with the commander of the Mariupol resistance, who they have since put an absolute ban on kids participating in the
Yeah.
resistance. I want to make that clear. The kids who were developing intel and fighting back in the early days, they were doing it on their own. It wasn't part of some organized command structure. And since then, the resistance has said, enough of that.
Yeah.
Be safe, as safe as you can in occupied territory. But one of the exchanges I had with this partisan commander was about the ban on these kids, and he said, when they turn 18, they'll get their turn.
Mm.
And I said, their turn for what? And he said, their turn to be heroes. And I knew what he meant. He meant they'll get their turn when they're 18 to die for their country. And when I say I don't ever want my kids to have that chance to be heroes, I mean it.
Hey, Ken, before we get into the piece too, let me ask you a background question for
Yeah.
everybody listening. Your involvement, your interest in helping Ukraine since this war began, your involvement, broadly speaking, for our listeners, what have you done?
So it began kind of accidentally. I was invited to screen a film in Kiev while I was invited to submit a film for the Kiev International Film Festival back. I think the invitation came in 2023. And I said, I'd be honored. I didn't know you were still having film festivals. My one condition is, can I come? Can I
Yeah.
come and present the film? And they were as surprised by that as I was by the invitation. They said, sure, if you can get here, no one's coming, but if you can get here, absolutely. And as is the story with almost anyone who goes to see Ukraine's fight for its freedom firsthand, I was just captivated. I was drawn in. I've fallen in love with the Ukrainian people and their fight for freedom. I have so many friends over there now. I feel a duty to them. I mean, you're probably going to ask me about some of the anecdotes in the story, but when you hear some of these just little vignettes, a 30-second story, you feel this weight, this burden to share it. And that's what has kept me going back again and again and again. Like that little girl who was in a Russian occupied village. And right before our interview started, she apologized to me for her stutter and said, I didn't used to have this problem until the Russians took me to the basement. You hear something like that from an 11-year-old child, and you can't just keep it to yourself. That has to be told.
You must feel blessed, may be the wrong word, but every time you go over there to do anything to help these folks, it's got to be just an amazing experience, but it must be really cool for you to do whatever you can do to help.
There's good and bad that
Yeah.
goes with it.
Yeah.
Every time I go back, as was the case this last time, just a month and a month ago, there are going to be people who you hung out with the last time that aren't there. And that's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard to even talk
Yeah.
about. But there is also something about going from America, where we often worry about the silliest things, to a place like Ukraine, where they know what matters. They know what's real. And I actually feel, I mean, I've heard others describe other journalists, one war photographer in particular, described Ukraine as their happy place, which is weird to say given
Mhm.
how horrific life is, but priorities are clear. Life is plain when you're with these units at the front. You worry about the things that really matter, and it has a way of focusing the mind. In that sense, I do feel lucky to have had this experience. I also feel like this is a once in a generation, maybe a once in a century opportunity to do something that will shape the future of the world. Ukraine's fight isn't just about Ukraine, it's about Western Europe, it's about Taiwan. It's about, I mean, we saw the effects in Hungary with the last election. I honestly believe Zelensky's example of leadership and courage and indomitability is helping to undermine the facade that is our current regime. I think Ukraine's fight will have ramifications for decades, perhaps centuries around the world, not just in this small corner of the world.
That voice belongs to Ken Harbaugh, former U.S. Navy pilot, writer. You really need to follow and subscribe to him on Substack, The Ken Harbaugh Show. His piece in The Atlantic that came out, I believe, on Sunday called The Warrior Witches of Ukraine's Resistance. Ken, again, your world, not my world. I was just transfixed by this piece. We're talking about an underground intelligence network of Ukrainians, of women, not just women, who are, again, what Ukraine does with drones is just amazing, but helping to direct Ukraine's drone strikes in the
Yeah.
Russian occupied territories.
Yeah,
Explain.
we see the drone strikes on TV. That's being covered finally. The Ukrainians have mastered the art of these drone strikes. The middle strike campaign in the occupied territories, the deep strike campaigns against Moscow and St. Petersburg and areas deep inside
And by the
Russia.
way, Kenny,
Yeah.
why is that? And maybe it's my ignorance. Ukraine seems to be like leaps and bounds ahead of folks when it comes to drones.
What's that phrase, Joe? Necessity is the mother of
Ah,
invention, and they have waited and waited for America and
yeah,
their supposed allies to come around,
yeah,
and we haven't. In fact, we've done the opposite. We've tied one hand behind their backs. We've told them
yeah,
they can't use weapons to strike inside Russia, and they finally said, "Enough. We're going to
yeah,
fight this war on our terms. We're going to fight to win, and we're not going to let you
yeah,
dictate to us from thousands of miles away what needs to happen." And so they have developed these native capabilities. The missiles that are hitting Russia, the drones that are hitting Russia, many of them, most of them now are made by Ukrainians, are
wow,
indeed inside Ukraine, manufactured there, launched from Ukraine. They are going to emerge from this war as a military superpower on
wow,
par with us. They are already leapfrogging, as you said, when you look at who is asking them for advice. The
yeah,
experts that are in the Gulf capitals right now, the experts that are in the Eastern European capitals, and I guarantee you there are Ukrainian experts in Taiwan as well. They're not American prime contractor experts. They're not from Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman. They're from Ukraine because
yeah.
Ukraine has figured out what the next war is going to look like because it's fighting it right now. And we damn well better listen, or we're going to lose. We're going to lose again. I mean, we've already lost the war with Iran because of bad
Yeah.
leadership and terrible decision making. And you know, those first 6 Americans, I'm on a bit of a tangent here, but those first 6 Americans who died in that base in Kuwait were hit by an Iranian drone, a cheap $20,000 drone that the Ukrainians had already figured out how to shoot down. And because of our hubris, our arrogance, we refused to learn those lessons from the Ukrainians.
And yet, your piece focuses on everything that leads up to that
Yeah.
drone strike in the Russian occupied territories, which is fascinating.
Yeah, because that's the piece of the story that hasn't been told.
Yeah.
We see the explosions on TV. We see the incredible success of the Ukrainian drone strike campaign. But that is the last link in this long and complex kill chain that starts with these incredibly brave Ukrainians deep behind enemy lines, developing this intelligence, identifying coordinates, and relaying it back to the Ukrainian military for that last link. And I was able to follow every link of that chain. I interviewed agents from the occupied territories. I interviewed the drone commanders who receive that intelligence via the handlers and deploy their drones to hit those targets. It is, I mean, it's not accidental. This is not some thrown together operation. It is very disciplined. It is very sophisticated, and it is very deadly. The Russians do not have an answer for it.
And very dangerous on the part of the
Yes.
resistance.
Yeah. Yeah. The agents that I talk to, most of them are, I mean, I don't know exactly what their lifespan is, but they have had to resort to some pretty extraordinary measures to stay alive. The logic of autonomous cells reaches its absolute minimum in these occupied territories with cells of a single person whose only contact with the network is through an encrypted app and their handler in free Ukraine. They may be in an apartment building inside Mariupol with 10 other agents, and they'll never know it. It's not like the French resistance during World War II, where they can, hang out in a basement drinking coffee and commiserating with each other. They have to have absolute operational security, operating alone, sometimes appearing like a collaborator. I think that's one of the other reasons they really want this story being told now, is they want a record of some of this heroism, because some of these women are in positions of the civil administration, working alongside the Russians. But the other reason, the main reason they want this story out, is that they want the Russians to be paranoid. They want the Russians.
Ken, you mentioned that in the piece, and it was really cool. Like, they want this story out. They want the Russians to be paranoid and be looking around every single corner when they're walking around.
Yeah. They feel like the Russian war machine is facing a crisis. The dam is beginning to crack, and they want to inject fear and paranoia into those cracks. And the agent from Mariupol, codenamed Sestra, put it best when she told me, I want that soldier in that barracks to see that old lady walking down the street as a threat. I want them to see the bus driver, the person making their sandwiches. I want them to know they are hated here, and I want them to be afraid every second of every day.
You talk about in the piece how Russians army, they're like a meat grinder, but yet they're very good. Russia's very good at countermeasuring some of.
They're not good at much. And your meat grinder observation is right on. The Ukrainian military actually refers to Russian infantry as human radar, because the way they deploy them is in waves of just bodies. And wherever those bodies pile up, that's where the Ukrainian strong points are. So the Russian military is bad at most things, but they're good at electronic countermeasures. They're good at that kind of intelligence. They're good at tracking phones. In fact, every single phone sold in occupied Ukraine has a Russian app on it called, ominously, Druj, or friend. And this, I can't think of a more Orwellian term. It is so on the nose. This app monitors everything you do and reports back to the FSB, the Russian intelligence services, your photos, your location, your texts. And if you're pulled over at a checkpoint without this app on your phone, or even worse, with an encrypted app like Signal, you're going to the basement. And the FSB, go ahead.
No, you've mentioned that word, the basement, now 4 or 5 times. What can you tell us about what that means?
It is a Ukrainian euphemism for a torture chamber, usually a basement underground, because it's dark and they can deprive the victims of any kind of external sensation. And I keep on comparing this to the Gestapo in Paris in World War II, but there are some key differences. One is technology, which I can explain in a bit, but the other is the utter shamelessness of the Russian occupiers. I mean, I'm not an expert on the Nazi occupation of France and the other areas in World War II, but there was a degree of Like
Yeah.
they were hiding what they were doing. They
Yeah.
knew that this was criminal. The Russians, by contrast, after they're done with a victim, they dump the body in the street in front of the torture chamber to signal to the neighbors that this is what could happen to you and here's where it will happen. There's no shame. Everyone knows where these dungeons, where these basements are, because the Russians want them to know.
And again, any phone purchased in the occupied territories has this Russian app on it.
Yeah,
So to not have that app on a phone makes you a target.
it does. To not have the app on a phone, that is an automatic red flag if you're stopped at a checkpoint with a phone that doesn't have it, because the phones that don't have the app are probably the ones that have been sent to resistance fighters. And they're sent in some really creative ways, most of which I can't talk about. But one of
Yeah.
the funnier ones, which has since been exposed and I can talk about, is in the mail through the German post service. Deutsche Post via Moscow was getting resistance cell phones into Mariupol. They have since shut that down, and the other methods of getting the phones in are really pretty innovative. But that's the main way that the resistance agents keep in touch with their handlers. It's
What
through phones.
and
Yeah.
Ken, what do they do? And again, we're solely talking about women, but these brave Ukrainians, the warrior witches of Ukraine's resistance. By the way, the word in your piece, Vidma,
Yeah.
Vidma. Explain, kind of.
Yeah, I'm glad I get to explain this, because witch has a certain connotation in
Yeah,
the US. It's very different in
yeah,
Ukraine. The Vidma appear throughout folklore and song as keepers of like communal knowledge, the village sages. And Vidma, or witches, it's the best translation, but
yeah.
they're only because there isn't a better one. They were honored and respected for their knowledge, not burned for it.
Yes,
So it is almost a perfect metaphor, at least historic metaphor, for these women agents who slip through the cracks and move about the occupied territories like shadows, collecting information and passing it back to the Ukrainian military. And I also like that it has a little bit of an ominous tone for the Russian occupier,
yeah.
and they should be afraid of these Ukrainian Vidma because they are having a devastating effect on these occupying forces.
Is Russia more increasingly aware of what these agents are doing? Like when they see a grandma walking through a village, do their antenna go up at all, or are they still just?
That's a great question. I mean, the agents and the resistance, broadly speaking, honestly would like the Russians to be afraid of
Yeah,
absolutely everyone because
yeah,
that's how
yeah,
you crack the occupation. But the Russian military, Russian society writ large, is just still so misogynistic and
yeah,
chauvinistic
yeah.
that they really have a hard time just imagining that the people who hate them the most are the women in these territories, who have very, very good reason to hate them.
They do, don't they?
Yeah, they
They
do.
really do.
I mean, this is tough. Yeah.
Ken, and you give a number of examples in the piece in the Atlantic. Everybody, the warrior witches of Ukraine's resistance, an amazing piece that I've now read 2 to 3 times. It can't escape me. Give me an example, one you can speak of a story of one of these agents and the work she did.
Yeah. So Sestra in Mariupol is developing targets all the time, sending them back to the Ukrainian military, which now has a very efficient loop for delivering these coordinates to
Mm,
the drone pilots and the drone operators. And there was one mission in particular, because as a Navy pilot, I'm fascinated by
yeah,
the tactical side of these operations, the deployment, the recovery of the drone if it's a bomb dropping drone. I wanted to know, like, how long it took. Is it days? Is it weeks before a target is fully vetted and struck? There are other injects into this decision loop. One of them is a really robust vetting process that uses um, Ukrainian diaspora, people who have left these
Ah,
communities, left these villages, but know the area really, really well. The last thing they want to do, the last thing the Ukrainian military wants to do is be taken advantage of. So if one of their agents is rolled up and her comms are intercepted, they don't want to be striking targets that the Russian military wants them to strike,
yeah,
if you know what I mean.
yeah.
So in very quick succession, they'll get intel from someone like Sestra. They will vet it with people with local knowledge. And I talked to one of these women who lives outside of Ukraine, but knows her
Wow.
village really, really well. And they will say, hey, we have this target. There's supposed to be a warehouse with a basement underneath, not a torture chamber, but a warehouse for, we think it's
Yeah.
storing ammunition. Does this sound right? She's like, oh, yeah, we used to make out there in high school. That's absolutely right.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
Sestra told me that there have been moments where, and the other thing they do very routinely and very well is develop these relationships with Russian soldiers to gather intel online.
Wow.
I mean, that's how the
Okay.
story opens, right?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
people like
Yeah.
Sestra are doing that as well from inside the territories.
Yeah.
There have been moments when she has been chatting with one of these targets as the drone strike hits them. Um,
Oh my God. Oh
So
my
we're
God.
talking about a 15-minute decision loop in some cases, because sometimes the drones are already overhead. If you think about
Yeah.
Ukrainian drone production, they have thousands of drones in the sky at any point, and now it's usually not 15 minutes, but there have been cases where they can turn around a hit that quickly.
How, not emotionally, that's a different question, but just how difficult was it for you to be able to write this piece?
Um, I have a process. I do most of my writing in Ukraine where I'm in a certain frame of mind,
Yeah.
and now that I think about it, I I love talking to you, Joe. You're the only one who asks me these kinds of questions. It's almost like being on a military deployment. And I
Uh-huh.
remember deploying as a Navy pilot. I was kind of a different person.
Yeah.
A lot of guys think about their families a lot. I honestly didn't. There were moments I would, but I tried not to. And I'm a different person when I'm on deployment. And if I'm writing downrange, if you will, if I'm writing in Ukraine, it's not that hard emotionally. It's just the job. It's the work. That's my process. I begin to sort of decompose, if you will,
Yeah.
on the plane
Yeah.
back when I
Yeah.
start to think about, especially the kids that I've talked to, and that those are the hardest ones to write about. Um, you know, when I was writing that story about the women's clinic in Kiev,
Yeah.
that was much easier to write while I was in Ukraine with a unit, just cranking away on my notepad at night. But when you have time to think about it, starting on the plane back from Warsaw, that's
Yeah.
when it starts to sink in.
And you mentioned how the resistance, Ukraine wants this story out to a degree. They want
Yeah.
the paranoia, but yet, was it difficult for you to get access? Because it's not like you're revealing secrets, but you're revealing a part of a battle plan here.
Well, they don't talk to just anybody, as far as I know. And most of the people I talked to said I was the first
Ah,
journalist they had been cleared to talk to. But I think that's because I've been at it for a couple of years.
bingo.
And my first embeds, my first really good relationships with the military effort, weren't with the resistance. They were with combat units, which
Ah,
have different threshold for security. They're not behind enemy lines, and I built up that trust over the past few years, and I think I made good on it with some great reporting, other pieces in the Atlantic. This is where it sort of all came
ah,
to a head, and I know that I was vouched for by some of these units. My articles were sent to some of these resistance
yeah,
commanders, but even then, and this story isn't in the Atlantic piece either, they wanted to make sure that the person they were talking to over the encrypted apps was actually me,
Oh,
because it's not like we're on a video chat.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I said, "Oh, it's definitely me. Here are some of my articles. Here's pictures of me with these well-known combat units." And they're like, "Anybody could have sent that. How do
Right.
we know we're talking to Mr. Harbaugh?" Their exact phrase was, "We know Mr. Harbaugh. We trust Mr. Harbaugh. How do we know you're Mr. Harbaugh?" And I said, "I don't, do you want to do a video call?" They said, "Absolutely not. But
Yeah.
how about this? We know the real Mr. Harbaugh does Substack lives all the time. On his next Substack live, which he has said is tomorrow morning, if he puts this phrase in the chat, we'll know we're talking to the
Oh,
same
wow.
person." And
Wow.
so on a Substack live, I put this phrase in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. And after that, communication with that resistance cell flowed very easily.
That's really cool. And Ken, I so appreciate your time, and everybody.
Yep.
And we're not done. We're not done.
Okay.
I could keep you for 3 hours. Everybody listening, Ken Harbaugh, former U.S. Navy pilot, an amazing guy, a writer. You see a lot of his stuff everywhere. He's been so focused on Ukraine and this country that's been defending itself now for 4+ years. Got a wonderful piece in the Atlantic out this weekend called "The Warrior Witches of Ukraine's Resistance." You mentioned early in the piece, Ken, about how the resistance has changed in these occupied territories, how Ukraine used to get out there, people would thump their chest, point their nose in the fingers of these Russian soldiers. It was public.
Yeah.
But now it's underground, and it's intelligence gathering and all
Yeah.
the rest. Describe that change.
It was public. It was kinetic too.
Yeah.
Now it's really neither. I mean, there is some kinetic action, and I'll explain what that means. It's sort of its military term, but the
Yep.
public stuff is gone because it's a death sentence. If you're caught playing a Ukrainian patriotic song, even with your window open, it's a trip to the basement. Kids used to like tag the sides of bus stops with blue and yellow paint. In fact, in the first 2 years of the occupation in Mariupol, the Russians grew so paranoid of those symbolic acts of defiance, they literally tried to ban the colors blue and yellow. When aid packages would be delivered to Ukrainian families with kids, the Russians would rip out the yellow and blue crayons. So that kind of public defiance has
How
largely
long did the
faded.
public defiance sort of last?
Up until about the last year, but the Russians
Okay.
have, in places like Mariupol, they've blanketed the city with these high definition cameras that can
Okay.
now track the movements of the entire population. So even if you're masked and you're tagging the side of a building with, I'm wearing it right now, this letter I appears in the Ukrainian alphabet, but not the Russian alphabet. It's become the symbol of the resistance. If you're spray painting that on the side of a building with a mask on, you're still going to get caught because they
Yeah.
will follow your trail back to where you started.
Yeah.
So those kinds of open acts of defiance are fading. The resistance strongly discourages them. The head of the Mariupol resistance again told me, "We need intel, not art," which I think is a
love that.
beautiful way to
Yeah.
put it. But yeah, in the early days, there was that kind of resistance. There was also kinetic resistance. I was encouraged to meet with this, quote, hero of the resistance. It's how he was described to me in Kherson. And when I walked into this cafe, which had camouflage netting over it to protect from the omnipresent Russian drones overhead, I saw this guy in the corner. He didn't fit my image at all of a hero of the resistance. He was wearing like dirty farmer's coveralls, had a few teeth missing. And he just sort of brushed off my first few questions. In fact, he said, "I wasn't part of the resistance. I wasn't a partisan." I said, "Why are we talking?"
Yeah.
And it came out over the course of the conversation. And this is also a story about just the incredible humility of Ukrainians. Didn't think he was doing anything that special, but what he was doing as a farmer with a farmhouse that overlooked a field that was a major choke point for the Russian invasion. He was seeing where the Russians were laying their mines to stop a Ukrainian counterattack. He was watching them lay them during the day, and at night, he would crawl into these fields with a rope and dig these mines up, tie them to his back, crawl into the Russian positions, and redeploy the mines next to Russian tanks. And I'm hearing him
Oh my
tell this story,
God,
and I'm like,
Ken.
how many times did you do this? And that's the first time he smiled, and he said, many times. And he didn't consider himself a part of the resistance. He wasn't doing it for
Oh my
reward or
God.
recognition. He was doing it because he felt his country needed him to do it in that moment.
I know you get this all the time, and you and I've talked about this, you big jerk. But like you hear that story, I hear all the stories you tell. I read about everything. We've got men and women in Ukraine physically defending their democracy, and here in America, another topic for another day. Ken,
Well,
that's
I
amazing.
mean,
Go ahead.
maybe I channel that story whenever I can to make
Oh,
the point here that look, if they can do that to defend their democracy, we can go to a protest a couple
hello.
times a year. We can vote every chance we get. It's we got a chance here to avoid all that because we have elections.
I want to believe that that farmer hero is still alive.
Yeah, he is. He's in free Kherson right now. So he's on the right bank of the river. I mean, Kherson is getting hit all the
Yeah.
time by drones, but he's no longer in the occupied territory. I hope he is. I can find out.
The Ken, what you call in the piece the middle strike campaign, this drone offensive deep inside Russian occupied territories, is it making a difference? Yes, and how big of a difference?
I think it's going to win the war. And I
Uh,
mean that. I know what makes the headlines are these strikes deep inside Russia against
yeah.
Moscow and St. Petersburg and elsewhere. But the middle strike campaign is what is choking off Crimea right now.
Mm,
And if the Russians can't resupply Crimea, they can't defend Crimea. And if they
right.
can't defend Crimea, Ukraine's going to take it back. And that's the jewel in the crown
Yeah.
of Russia's whole strategy with Ukraine. And it's that middle strike campaign that has effectively cut off that land bridge, the M14 highway between Russia and Crimea. I mean, it's astonishing to think about the fact that Ukrainians now have effective air control over the main supply route to Crimea. And it is stressing the entire Russian air defense system. If you wonder why drones are getting through air defenses in Moscow, it's because they're so stressed at the front in Ukraine.
Yeah.
That when I talk about the dam beginning to crack, it's a great metaphor because once
Yeah.
that water starts to seep through, it happens really quickly. Russia can't build these air defense systems fast enough, as fast as Ukraine is destroying them. And once Ukraine gets a beachhead, they can exploit it and they can get behind those Russian air defenses and just wreak havoc, which is what they are beginning to do in the occupied territories, and we're beginning to see the extent of that inside Russia as well. The other thing that's not in the piece, but is just a window into how badly corrupted Russian society is
Yeah.
that a lot of the best air defense systems are protecting oligarchs' compounds. Think about
Oh,
that.
oh,
Yeah.
wow. What an impossible question to answer, but screw it. I'm going to ask you. Where are we at in this war? 18 months from now, where are we going to be at?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think it ends unless something changes in Moscow because of who Putin is.
Okay.
I think his survival depends strangely on this war. Imagine what happens in Russia if this army returns home the way it is right now. Imagine what happens in Russia if that whole narrative about fighting Nazism in Ukraine falls apart and if they retreat. I just feel like Putin's survival depends on this wartime economy. And the Russians around him are going to have to make a decision about how much more their country needs to bleed for his vanity.
Because Ken, they're losing how many men, how many soldiers a month?
Between 35 and 40,000 a month. A month. A Vietnam every 6 weeks.
And where like I always wonder, like the Russian people,
Yeah.
do they support this? The average Russian folks on the street?
When you ask them, they do, but that
Yeah,
is because it is such a repressive,
right.
mind-controlled society, and the vast majority of the casualties in this war are not coming from Putin's
Yeah,
base of support. They're not coming from Moscow. They're not coming from the
yeah,
big cities. They're coming from the hinterlands. They're coming
yeah.
from these former republics. It's basically a mercenary army. The
Yes.
first Russian army that invaded Ukraine is dead. It's
Yeah,
gone. Russia is probably on its third army right now, which is composed of these human waves of ill-equipped, untrained infantry drawn from the farthest regions of Russia that have no political power. But I have to believe long term, Russia is sowing the seeds of its own destruction because enough of these people are going to go home and begin to ask, what are we getting out of this deal with Moscow?
well,
Nothing but blood. Yeah.
can you lay out a f a fairly depressing scenario in that it ain't gonna end, you said, until Putin's gone,
Yeah.
And yet, when you're asked this direct question, "Is Ukraine winning the war?" Your answer is what?
My answer is yes,
Yeah.
because of the math, because of the
Mm,
breakdown of the Russian air defenses, and because
yeah,
of the casualty ratio at the front. Putin will not survive this war because a nation
yeah,
cannot survive 35 to 40,000 casualties a month. It's only so long that that can go on. The Ukrainians will survive because they have to. This is an existential fight for
yeah.
them. They know every single one of them what they are fighting for. At some point, the Russian military, the Russians are going to ask, what are we fighting for? And once they realize that the only thing they are fighting for is Putin, I think Putin's days are numbered.
You alluded to this early. Zelensky is sort of a Churchill of our times, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. He is a heroic figure in Ukraine and beyond. I think he will be seen in Churchillian terms and arguably even greater than that, because Churchill never had tanks on the outskirts
Yeah,
of London.
yeah, yeah.
Zelensky has had many opportunities to run, and he
Yes.
has not run. And his fight, like England's in 1939, has global ramifications. I just wish the US would appreciate that, that we are in, well, we're way past 1939 now, but we're looking at a nation almost single-handedly defending the notion of
Yeah,
freedom
yeah,
for the entire world, for Taiwan, as I said before, for the Baltic states. And I do maintain that his example of what real courage, real leadership, real devotion to democracy, his example of what that looks like is, I mean, it's such a mirror when held up to our president.
Well,
And yeah,
yeah, Ken, and again, a topic for another day, and you know me, I'll go off on this till the cows come home. Trump ain't, he just fundamentally is not on Ukraine's side. He's on
yeah,
Putin's side. We could drink a lot of tequila and talk about why that is, but the leader of the free world is not on the side of the free world right now.
yeah.
Um, Ken, last question on this piece. We're talking about average day-to-day Ukrainians abroad and in these Russian occupied territories who are agents
Yeah.
providing the intelligence for drones to target and kill Russians. Like, do they, and maybe this is hard to answer, do these simple folk, do they understand what they're doing? What do they think about what they're doing?
My guess is that they're not going to read stories about their heroism
Yeah,
until this thing is over,
yeah,
or ever, because so many of them won't survive.
yeah,
And you got to realize most of them have no training, no formal training whatsoever. One of the thriving black markets within the resistance are these hard copy tradecraft manuals, because it's too dangerous to send them over email, right? So they are smuggling in these books on reconnaissance, on tradecraft, hidden
Yeah.
inside like artificially weathered novels that go back and forth across the border. One of the favorite tradecraft manuals in the Kherson resistance is actually an old Soviet era book about CIA methods in Africa
Yeah.
during the Cold War. And, and I don't know how many copies of this there are, but not enough because they're very prized among the agents of the Kherson resistance, the left bank. But yeah, I gotta believe that the job of these agents is incredibly lonely because they don't have contact with other agents. It's not as if they're able to watch the Western media, and it's not as if the Western media is reporting anyway on
No.
the heroism that's the foundation for these drone strikes. We're getting all the reports on the drone strikes.
Bingo.
Nobody saw fit to ask, how is that intel being developed?
Well, and Ken, that's why your piece is of such value because it describes everything that leads up to that drone strike.
Yeah.
So why do they do it? Why do they do it?
Why do they do it? Not
Why do
everyone does it.
Yeah.
I think in every population, including in this country, you could segment it.
Yeah.
There's a segment of the population that's
Yeah.
just like, I'm gonna wait it out. I want
Yeah.
nothing to do with this. There's a middle population who are sympathetic, who are like, I'll do what I can, but I'm not gonna risk my life, much less my family's life. And then I don't know if it's hardwired, if it's something some people are just born with, but there's that fraction of a percent who are like, I'm gonna put it all on the line for what's right.
Yeah.
And I know what has happened here.
Yeah.
I know what happened at the Mariupol theater. I saw the pictures from Bucha, and this can't be my country's future. This
Yeah.
can't be my kid's future. And even if it costs me my life, I'm going to fight it. I don't begrudge that middle population
No.
their desire to like observe and help
Yeah.
when they can. Because I'm not sure what I would do in that situation, but it's that 1% that rise to the occasion that I think freedom depends on every time.
Hey, knucklehead! I think I know what you would do.
Okay.
I just want to thank you, my brother, for writing this piece. And I want to continue this week to promote it all over the place. It's called The Warrior Witches of Ukraine's Resistance, written by Ken Harbaugh. It's in the Atlantic. Check it out. Just tells an amazing story of everything that leads up to that drone strike that you see. The Ukraine resistance. Follow and subscribe to Ken. The Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack. That man right there is doing amazing work, supporting what Ukraine is doing, the resistance is doing, and getting word out in this country. Ken Harbaugh, my friend, you're the best.
Thank you, Joe. Back to you. Thank you.
Keep at it.
Same to you, Joe.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody else. Thank you. Be brave. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, follow, and share The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple, Spotify. Plus, don't forget to subscribe to The Social Contract on Substack. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.